All right, we're going to get started. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Dr. Mitchell Culver, and I am the founding manager of something called the Center for Student Analytics at Utah State University. The charter of the Center for Student Analytics is to basically socialize and train on effective analytics use here at Utah State, and then also where we can to help other institutions of higher education to be successful in the use of analytics as well. Analytics obviously is a new discipline in higher education. There's a lot of topics that relate to the core issues of what makes analytics work and how analytics can be used sustainably in a higher education setting. So this is the second webinar in a summer analytics webinar series. The next one will occur on August 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And today's webinar, the topic is practical analytics in curriculum complexity. And just to be clear about what the topic of this webinar is so that people can kind of forecast what we're going to be talking about today, this webinar is specifically designed to talk about software designed by the University of New Mexico and some people at the University of Kentucky, where it maps curriculum complexity and then allows faculty members and those who own the curriculum to actually engage in a process of making the curriculum process a little bit more simplistic or simplified if that's warranted, if that's appropriate. Now, given that that tool is an analytics tool, it also will need to be socialized, and so a large portion of the content from today's webinar will be specific to essentially talking through the ideas of how do you socialize analytics in a practical way. Practical here meaning when work actually gets done, when practice actually changes. A lot of times we see analytics deployed at institutions of higher education where the tools are shiny, there's a lot of excitement upon the creation or the kind of the release of the tool, and then individuals don't actually get to work and do the really important work that is the work of socializing the analytics tools and making sure that they actually help professionals, faculty, staff, executives, to change the practice of the institution so that we get a better result for our students. So I want to start on that note. That's kind of an agenda of where we're headed today. On that note, I kind of want to start with this idea of the promise of analytics in higher education. I really feel like it's a twofold promise. The first and most important promise of any analytics system, whether it's relative to curriculum or relative to student intervention or relative to business intelligence, is that we have the opportunity to use analytics to enhance student well-being by optimizing the institution. Analytics give us a nice lens onto the institutional's kind of existence as an ecosystem and help us to determine and also to act on students in a way that enhances their well-being. Are we serving students to the best extent possible? Can we do better? These are questions that analytics help us not only to ask and answer, but then also to take action on and make plan for initiatives that might impact student well-being. So obviously student well-being is at the core of what we want to be doing in analytics, but there's also this second layer which I think is often overlooked, but it's just as important because it's the path to student well-being, which is that we also optimize the institution using analytics by enhancing professional well-being. If the analytics systems make the professional experience more effective or efficient, then of course those professionals are going to be able to enact their practice on behalf of the students. If we're tuning and optimizing the institution and we're missing the opportunity to tune and optimize professionals' experiences in their everyday workflows using analytics, then of course it's not going to trickle down and help students. Obviously there are some analytics tools that are used directly by students in their experiences, but generally we want to use analytics to both optimize the institution by enhancing professional well-being, but also working towards that student well-being. And I think you'll see that in this presentation is a lot of the content here is about how do you support faculty, especially in an autonomy-supportive way as they're using analytics that help them to map curriculum and figure out where curriculum could be perhaps less complex, a little bit more elegant. So having said that, I want to harken back to a webinar I did for EDUCAUSE in October, which was called the Lifecycle of Sustainable Analytics. Maybe some of you saw that webinar. And basically, you can watch that webinar and access a white paper version at the link that's listed on the screen at the bottom. But this is a really important a framework to understand why the presentation is outlined the way it is. We are going to be talking about some tools that have been created, and that's what we consider formal analytics, kind of the data, the visualizations, the dashboards. But we also are going to spend a great deal of time talking about the second half of the sustainable analytics life cycle, which is that fulfillment of human need, where we actually socialize the tools and empower human action and change everyday practice at the institution so that we can actually advocate and innovate for our students and for their well-being. So from my perspective, this conversation has two equal parts. Both are necessary and sufficient for actually affecting change at the institutional level. So we're talking about tools, but we're going to spend just as much time talking about fulfillment of human needs, or you could call that change leadership, change management. How do you actually get the analytics to come alive and to change everyday practice at the institution? So having that said, we want to get in and I want to introduce the tool that we're going to be talking about today. The tool that we're talking about today is called curricular analytics. And it was developed by Chowki Abdallah, who is provost emeritus down at University of New Mexico. And he, as provost, I don't know if he founded, but he certainly led and was the chief figurehead of this Institute of Design and Innovation. I met Chowki at a Gates Foundation event down in Nevada that was being hosted by UNLV, by Beth Berry and her team at UNLV. And he gave a really nice keynote about this software. And then we had a conversation afterwards, and I said, hey, you know, I really want to use that at Utah State. And well, it's an open source tool, so that makes it nice. So what we're talking here about is this is a tool that was designed by Institute of Design and Innovation. It's an open source tool. I'm going to give you the web link. You're going to be able to get into it and create an account for free and sign up and play around in the sandbox of that tool on the internet. But I do want to give credit where credit is due. This was a tool developed by Chowki and his team, and we're really impressed with it. And you may have seen it before. Sometimes it's referred to as the Kentucky software because Chowki's colleague, Dr. Greg Heilemann, also was instrumental or even the brainchild of this software, and he left University of New Mexico for University of Kentucky. And so it's sometimes referred to as the New Mexico software, sometimes referred to as the Kentucky software, but it's all the same people, all the same group. And then the slides that I'm using here that are Chowki slides are labeled University of New Mexico. So just to be clear that those aren't my slides. And we're going to get into what is this tool, what does it do? Well, his presentation included this idea that basically a lot of students will complete a bachelor's degree, and this isn't just true at the University of New Mexico, it's true here at Utah State University, it's probably true at your institution as well. A bachelor's degree usually requires 128 credits, which is that gray line that goes across the whole thing. Students, undergraduate students, will usually earn 20, 40, 60 credits on top of what's required. And that's because they're taking extra classes here and there that may not be part of the degree completion experience, but may be a product of complex curriculum, or maybe a product of switching majors, or any number of things that maybe they've transferred in credits that can't be used. And so this kind of credit overload that happens at institutions where students are graduating almost with as many credits as they could take into a master's degree, right, and earn a master's degree. But at the time they're earning a bachelor's, they have this credit overage. And that's a big problem because it costs the students money, it stalls out their momentum. And what University of New Mexico kind of, in developing this analytics tool, they said, well, we can map program curriculum, so major program requirements for a specific program, and we could figure out if there's something about that curriculum, the way the program has been designed and all its prerequisites and co-requisites, that really creates and stalls out students in forcing them to take more and more credits. And that's exactly what they've done. So this is what you're looking at here. I want to give you some wayfinding so you can understand what you're looking at here. This is term 1 through term 8 of, I think, an electrical engineering program. Yeah, electrical engineering program. I don't know what institution this is for. I don't think it's University of New Mexico. This is basically 8 semesters. So this would be the 4-year plan that would be published in a university catalog. And for electrical engineering students, it would say in your first semester of your 4-year plan, term 1, these are the 6 classes that you need to take. In term 2, here's the 5, 6. So each of these columns is a recommended battery of courses that a student would be required to take to complete the electrical engineering degree. The arrows, which is what we're going to be focused on here for a little while, articulate the prerequisite relationships between courses and co-requisite relationships between courses. So every time you see a circle, that's a course requirement for graduation. And every time you see an arrow, it's either a prerequisite leading from one term to another, or a co-requisite anytime you see an arrow drawing up and down in the same term. Now this electrical engineering program, you can see it's pretty complex. Engineering has a penchant for being complex in its curriculum, in what the requirements that students are required to complete before they graduate. The interesting thing is you can map another electrical engineering program here on the bottom, which is from a different institution. To be clear, I don't know which institution these two are. I think they're just examples. I do think they're real, but they're not identified on purpose. Both of these programs are electrical engineering programs. Both of these give a student a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering. And so it's really important to now compare and say, what are we noticing about what's being required on the top at one institution versus what's being required of students at the bottom at the other? Now, an important disclaimer to have at the beginning of this conversation is that the bottom institution is a higher rated program. So let's look at what's going on here. So first of all, in the top, you can see that the longest course pathway, meaning the longest pathway of courses that a student is required to take, in the top, it looks like it's 9 courses long. In the bottom, the longest pathway is 5 courses long. In the top, Calculus 1 is required in the first term, and it's supposedly through prereq-coreq relationship related to 24 courses. In the bottom, Calculus 1 is related to about 10 in terms of the way that the curriculum has been articulated in terms of prerequisite and co-requisite relationships. In the top one, you can see that on that longest path, if any student were to fail one of those 9 courses in that longest path, their entire curriculum would immediately shift and they would be in a 9-semester program. And every time they fail one of these critical long pathway courses, their program shifts and their program becomes that much longer. 1 term, 2 term, 3 terms longer. In the bottom electrical engineering program, the longest path is 5 terms long, which means if a student fails any of those classes, has to repeat any of those classes, they have 3 semesters of buffer before it extends their program beyond the 8th term into a 4.5-year, 5-year program. And the whole idea here is that the software is designed, this open source analytics tool that you can have access to, I'm going to give you the web link, is designed to help program directors and curriculum committees to look at their curriculum and also benchmark it against other institutions to say, now, is what we're doing here sensible? Is what we're doing in these prereq relationships, is it defensible? Or is it something that's just kind of created over time and nobody even knows how we came to the current situation, but we're not interrogating it, etc. So that's kind of the idea. The software itself includes all of these different metrics that Chooke and his team worked out. So delay, reachability, blocking, central courses, degrees of freedom, total credits. These are metrics that are defined in the program that help the program user, the analytics user, end user, to actually think through how is the way that we have designed any given course of study impacting students' ability to maintain momentum towards graduation. This is how the actual program looks. So you can see this is a mechanical engineering program from the University of New Mexico. And the 8 terms have been articulated. All the prerequisite and co-requisite relationships are articulated. And then as you hover on any given course, in the software, it will show you kind of the complexity, the delay factor. And these are metrics that allow you to start to think that, well, is there a better way of doing this? Now, because it's an open source tool, every university that uses it, that uploads their curriculum, is able to see and benchmark against all other institutions that are in the software. So this is a mechanical engineering program. We can actually search by the term mechanical engineering, and actually we can use CIP codes, CIP codes, which help us to determine actually that the programs are really comparable. And we can search by CIP codes to find other mechanical engineering programs that we can benchmark against. And you can immediately see how valuable that is, where you can start to compare apples to apples. For mechanical engineering, is our complexity on par with what we're seeing elsewhere? Are we overly complex? Are we not as complex? And then you can also even look up, program rankings and accreditation tables or whatever and say, based on complexity, who's actually getting a better result in terms of graduation rates and placement and these kinds of things. Now, everything I've told you up to this point, here's the website, curricula.academicdashboards.org. And I would encourage you not to hop in and start creating an account right now because you'll miss some of the content about socializing this, and we don't want you to do that. But you'll be able to sandbox in that. It's an open source tool, so it's free to use. You just log in and it'll be great. I do want to clarify that basically this section of the presentation, everything I've just shared in terms of what the software is and does, is basically me just repeating to you what I heard Choki share down at that Gates Foundation event. So I want to be clear about that is Choki's content, that's his presentation, and I'm just kind of regurgitating it. From here forward, it's my stuff, and it's more about the socialization. But to access this product, you would go to this website, curricula, plural, .academic-dashboards, plural, .org. So both of those are plural. And now, what do you do in terms of practical issues, right? So now we're talking about how do we practically use a software like this. You can see the promise of this software. You can see how desirable it is just from a perspective of optimizing the institution and cleaning it up a bit. So I'm really excited to talk about this. Before actually I move on, I maybe want to open it up and see if there are any questions. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat box, and I'll be able to see your question, and I'll read your question out, and then I can answer it. But we've actually covered a lot of ground already in terms of this software and what it is and what it does. I'm leaving a little bit off the table and encourage you to go and explore. But if you have questions, start typing those in, and then I can get to those questions now before we kind of move on to the socialization aspects. We kind of deployed this here at Utah State. We've been piloting it with very specific departments. And we're part of an APLU Land Grant Western cluster that has done some work on this as well. And so we're very excited for this process. And we have some early wins, which is partly what I'm going to be sharing about in terms of socializing. How do you socialize this software? But I do want to kind of take a breath here just to be sure that everyone's kind of clear on what we're looking at and how this software, what the promise of this software is in terms of its actual use. I don't see any questions yet. But I can certainly come back if anyone has typed any in. So moving on, how do you practically get software like this deployed widely at an enterprise level, people actually using it, and people actually using it to enhance and optimize the university for student well-being at the institution? Well, here's some practical issues to consider as you think about that process. The first and most important, I would say, is that the faculty own the curriculum at most institutions I'm familiar with, which means that unless you're, kind of pre-contemplating very carefully about how faculty are going to receive this and about what the opportunities are from the terms of what we'd say is faculty agency, or in other words, faculty taking agency to make the product work and to actually do the right work with the product, then you're probably, if you're saying, well, a registrar's office could use it and fix everything. No, I don't think that that's really realistic. I think in all cases, you're going to get the best result when the faculty are kind of seen as key to driving change using this tool. So that's one practical issue to consider. The next is that maintaining the status quo is always the path of least resistance. This is something that we well know. And all it means is this idea is that if you just turn on the software and you just hand it out to people, and they just kind of get in there and do what we call datavoyeurism, which is to use a tool but not actually to affect change in practice, then it's very easy for them to go, oh, well, yeah, I see, that's interesting, but the curriculum is probably complex for a reason. And that desire to not have to do the hard work of interrogating the history, or what we'd say the genealogy of how the curriculum came to be, unless you're interrogating that genealogy and really doing your due diligence cyclically, every 5 years or every 7 years, saying, we really get into that curriculum and kind of interrogate it and say, does it really exist in the best form that it exists in? And what we're already finding is that faculty do this work, they're saying, oh, this is not, we can do better, right, for our students and for ourselves. So it's easy to maintain the status quo. And so if you're gonna affect change, then you have to have a game plan. The third thing I want to just share is this idea that you cannot mandate excellence. So anytime you're releasing any tool, analytics or otherwise, where the hope is that people will use that tool to craft and hone and optimize the institution better for students year by year, you have to understand that a lot of that work is best done when people take up the cause because they want to participate in affecting good change, right? If you try to mandate excellence by saying, every faculty member will get in and use this tool, every department, every curriculum committee will do this, and they will do it because I have said so, at some leadership position has said so, you're probably not going to get the result that you want, because when you try to mandate excellence, you don't get excellence. You kind of get kind of feigned attempts at doing the work. You kind of get compliance for compliance sake. You get people checking the boxes rather than asking authentic, difficult questions, complex questions. And so if you're trying to mandate excellence in terms of getting people to use this and to enhance and optimize their curriculum, you're probably going about it a little bit wrong. Those are some guiding principles that will help us to understand why we chose to socialize it the way that we are socializing it. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about change leadership. Some of this is relevant to more initiatives than just curriculum complexity. But in this case, we're talking about persuading faculty to interrogate and optimize the curriculum using analytics. And that's going to require a great deal of change management, change leadership. And so what are some core principles there? When I thought about this work and what might be possible, the Beckert-Harris change equation came to mind. And I really like this change equation. We use it a lot in the work that we do at the Center for Student Analytics because it helps us to think through some of the necessary components for actually helping people to do new work, to do enhanced work, optimized, innovative work. So the formula goes like this: change equals dissatisfaction times vision times the first steps, and all of those things must be greater than resistance to change. So dissatisfaction times vision times first steps must be greater than resistance, and then you actually get change. Now this is a factorial equation, right? So it's multiplicative, right? So D times V times F, which means if D or V or F zero out, even just one of them zeroes out, then the whole thing zeroes out and you don't see change. So you need to have at least a modicum amount of dissatisfaction, you need to have vision, and you need to have planning for first steps that you expect people to take. We use this all the time when we're planning any kind of training or workshop about a new tool or a new way of doing things. We say, let's start with the dissatisfaction space. How are the people who we expect to actually do the work, how are they dissatisfied with the status quo? Are they dissatisfied? Is there a way that we can help them to see why they should be dissatisfied? You know, if you let a lot of faculty and staff and executives know students are suffering as a result of some problem that exists, usually that helps them to feel a little bit of dissatisfaction. And in fact, that's what they found at University of New Mexico, is the opportunity cost of extending a program from 4 years to 5 years was something like $45,000. I don't know if it was per semester or per year, but it was exorbitantly expensive. And that's the opportunity cost of not only having to pay tuition for an extra year, but also to not be employed, right, after your 4th year, right, to be done and to get a job. The opportunity cost is extremely hard on students. The other idea here is that when you artificially extend students' programs by having unnecessarily complex curriculum, then you're creating situations where students are taking seats that are probably in courses that are in high demand. So if you have a course of 180 students, it's capped at 180, you only have one professor, whatever it is, one full-time line that can teach that course, and it's capped at 180, and you have a lot of students failing that class and then having to repeat, and it's in this long chain of prerequisites, then of course they're going to be taking seats that new students would be eligible for. And so it creates all these kinds of secondary contingencies, right, where there's a domino effect. We don't want to see that. So as an institution, from a strategic enrollment management perspective, from a student well-being perspective, there's lots of angles to become dissatisfied. And so the goal is to have that conversation, right? In terms of vision, the software itself, most analytics softwares kind of imply a certain vision for change. And then first steps is obviously what training is all about, is getting people to take those first steps. I don't want to talk that much about resistance because I find, although you do need to mentally acknowledge that resistance can and will exist, and to address resistance in all places, and even to respond well to it, I don't know, resistance can be different, one type of resistance or another, depending on the institutional climate and culture and the personalities in the room. So I think resistance is something that I'll just say, that's something you need to be mindful of, but we're not going to address it explicitly. So let's start with dissatisfaction. So leadership begins with questions, not answers. So in this rollout, when we piloted this with faculty, what we said was, well, we're going to go in and instead of telling them why they should be dissatisfied, we're going to ask them to talk about it and to come up with their own reasons for being dissatisfied, which is a lot better way to do it, right? When a person can articulate their own dissatisfaction, it's a lot better than them trying to kind of personalize or identify with someone else's dissatisfaction. So in this case, the way we did that in this workshop, this 2-hour workshop that we planned, was to really go in and to start with this question, literally to tell them, hey, we're going to look at curriculum complexity, and complexity means excessive prerequisite relationships or excessive and unnecessary prerequisite relationships. So we asked the faculty in the seminar, in the workshop, what is the appropriate purpose of a prerequisite course? What's the appropriate purpose or function of a prerequisite course? And then we just kind of threw it out there. And there was initial, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And well, just get going and kind of see what you can come up with. And they very quickly came up with an extensive list, which we wrote on the board. And I have an example from one of the departments here. Faculty responses. So I put 2 columns on the board: appropriate uses for prerequisites on the one side, and on the other side of the whiteboard I put inappropriate uses for prerequisites. And you can see immediately the faculty's dissatisfaction with overly complex curriculum kind of started to shine through. There already is dissatisfaction amongst the people who we want to be dissatisfied, so that's really great. So the first, appropriate uses for prerequisites, they say, well, it's really appropriate for building foundational knowledge required in later courses. 2, ensuring that students have demonstrated the ability to engage a discipline at a certain level of academic functioning, right? We want to know that they're ready. We're not going to move them on into other coursework if they're not ready for it. We don't want to harm them in that way. 3, facilitating interest development, right? So there's this idea a student can take a class for students before subject matter becomes increasingly complex and rigorous. So we might take a kind of explore or introductory course. It's a prereq requirement for all the other courses in the major, and this is so that a student can kind of start to get a feel for the discipline before it would get complex and they'd say, oh, I don't like this and I'm leaving, right? So that the idea here is that the prerequisite is helps students to get a taste, and because we don't want to inadvertently turn students away from a promising discipline early on by creating overly complex classes, right? If a student can start by taking a 4,000 level class, no prerequisite, and it's really rigorous, and then it's just so hard for them as a freshman, they go, oh, I don't want to take this class anymore because I don't want to take this major anymore because that class was just so hard. Well, that may be a good reason to have more introductory courses or a few introductory courses before you're jumping them into a 4,000 level class. Now, all of those appropriate uses kind of, you flip them in the head, they become inappropriate uses, but there was immediately this awareness amongst the faculty in the discussion of, oh yeah, we know what you're getting at. We're really dissatisfied too, because sometimes we see prereqs being used for these inappropriate reasons. So 1, keeping freshmen and sophomores out of a class. Right? We're just trying to overly manage, right? And instead, we should be using credit restrictions, right? Students must have at least 60 earned credits, right? So rather than making this long pathway of courses, one, then the next, and the next, and the next, and oversteering for the students, just let them take whatever it is, and then just say, for this particular class, we want you to have at least 60 credits. Most institutions, our registrar's offices, are able to create what's called a credit restriction, where you were required to take a certain number of credits. And it's funny because faculty learn that. So some faculty are surprised to hear that. They go, really? I didn't know that that was an option. Like, why do we have this long 4-course series over the first 2 years when we could just say you have to have so many credits before you take that 4th class? Those first 3 classes can be taken in the order we want. And there starts to be these realization, these light bulb moments of like, well, maybe our curriculum is overly complex. The second one on this list down at the bottom is keeping students out of major-specific courses when we could simply require that students be in a declared major before registering for a class. So the idea is a major course only has so many seats in it. We want to keep students out of that class until they're really in the major. This is the same issue. Rather than building a long line of prerequisites leading up to that class, you simply just say, well, students have to be declared in the major before they take that class. And now you're not artificially creating program management that keeps students out of a class by using prerequisites inappropriate, right? The third thing is overzealous program managers that believe a large number of prerequisites inherently translate to program rigor. This was a really funny one because the faculty kind of caught on to this and then had a discussion about it, a long discussion about this idea that there is kind of this inherent kind of itch that people want to scratch, in believing that rigor must translate to an incredible number of prerequisites, and that we can show how rigorous our programs are by how many prerequisites there are in the major. Well, obviously we saw in the earlier example where we were comparing two electrical engineering programs that that's not the case. The least complex program on the bottom was a higher rated program. And we do see that. There's no reason to add prereqs where a true prerequisite relationship doesn't exist. And this kind of was a what we call a deep breath moment for the faculty, where there was kind of this deep breath and sigh like, oh, we get it. Like when we inappropriately use prereqs, we're actually creating barriers for student well-being, and barriers that we have to manage and be responsible for. When it would actually be much better if we only use prerequisites like a scalpel, right? Only where necessary and no further, right? And so this kind of response, you can see, gets the conversation going. And as a change leadership kind of enterprise, this is exciting to hear the faculty moving in this direction. As soon as you can see that they get the reasons for being dissatisfied, that they understand why we should not settle for less in terms of curriculum complexity or overly complex curriculum, we shouldn't settle for less on behalf of our students, then now you have an opportunity to show them a vision, right? So that was the next thing, right? So in the equation, you have dissatisfaction times vision. Well, embedded in every analytics tool is a vision for change. And that's what this software is about, is this software tells you, if you can look at this and interrogate what is going on in the student's experience, then you have an opportunity to clean it up, to fix old errors, or errors, as we talk about the genealogy of how things come to be, errors that kind of got built into the system that nobody even remembers. There was a really good example in this one department, food science. There was a class, chemistry something or other, that they said had been required for all these other courses. And they said, well, why? They didn't even know what that class was. What is this chemistry? They were looking at each other. Why are we requiring chemistry for all these food science courses? In particular, they looked it up and they said, oh, that chemistry class used to be taught by a professor who knew there was a lot of food science majors coming through. And so he would use food science examples to teach the class. We made it a prereq because he was such a good chemistry teacher for our food science majors. But he retired 10 years ago. And the people who have taught it subsequently, they were kind of aware that they're probably not teaching it to cater to food science majors. So these prereqs came into existence because we had a really good relationship with one chemistry faculty member who's no longer here, then keeping that prereq relationship in place after the fact doesn't necessarily make as much sense. Maybe we need to interrogate that. Maybe we need to get a hold of the syllabi that the different instructors are using and to interrogate whether or not we truly want that as a prereq for our food science majors, or if it was just something that was a benefit to them because of a personality that's no longer with the university. And these kinds of moments are embedded in that analytics tool. The analytics tool implies a vision for change. And one of the feedbacks, I'm often asked by analytics vendors, different LMS companies, different predictive modeling, intervention analytics companies, to give them feedback about their tools from this perspective of sustainable analytics, right? And the thing that I always notice about a lot of engineers is a lot of times they'll design products in a way that kind of tiptoe around the core vision, right? Tiptoe around the core philosophy that in every tool there is kind of this vision for how you can make the institution better. And a lot of times engineers are almost, I think they feel compelled to try to hide their cards or hide the philosophy or hide the vision because they want it to be objective. Like, here's a tool, it's analytics, it's data, it's going to be objective, but if subjectively you start to use it and you come up with the same vision as I do, then maybe that's good, right? And my advice to those vendors is always, and those engineers, is no, you've got to own it. At the core of every tool is a vision for how you can change practice. And unless you're willing to own that change and really market it to your end user, they're going to be lost in deploying that tool and understanding how it's supposed to change their institution. And so I always advocate for vendors to be a little bit more clear-throated about what their philosophy of how to improve higher education is, right? Rather than leaving that up to the institutions solely, right? It can be a collaborative conversation, but it shouldn't be hidden. Well, obviously in this program, in this tool, the vision that's being articulated is that overly complex, unnecessarily complex, and even what you'd say forgetfully complex, in other words, complexity that nobody even can tell you why it's there, that these overly unnecessarily complex programs are clearly damaging to the student experience. They create unnecessary barriers. They're clearly damaging to the institutional brand. If your institution is putting students through these kinds of hedge mazes of curriculum that don't even make sense in terms of a disciplinary benchmarking comparison, like in this comparison on the screen, these are identical electrical engineering programs, right? They both are electrical engineering programs, and the top one has just been overly programmed. And the vision is embedded there. It says overly complex curriculum is bad for everyone involved. And unless you can get it under control and really be intentional with your curriculum, you're going to have a problem. And you can see that vision, right? And so as we train on the tool, right, in this workshop of change management, we start with building a little dissatisfaction through that question and answer, what's the appropriate use of a prerequisite? Then the next step is to give them the same presentation that I gave earlier, right? The actual exposition of the tool. Here's the tool, here's how to use it, here's what it looks like in real life. And then that starts to give them this vision, and they start to get it, and they go, oh. Now, I do 2-hour workshops, and people always complain, even the department heads, they'll complain, they'll say, why 2 hours? Can it be an hour? Can it be an hour and a half? I always say, no, I do a 2-hour workshop because I need about 25 minutes to build up dissatisfaction. I need another 25 minutes to develop a vision and show the training of the actual tool and kind of imply the vision for how people are going to change. And then we need a little bit of a breather. People always need a bathroom break or whatever. And then I need a full hour working session so that people can actually start the first steps. Because you build up all that dissatisfaction and all that vision, and then so many times the training's over. And you leave the room, and the hope with analytics a lot of times in these trainings is, well, we trained them, and now they're going to go away to their desks, and of course they're going to do high quality work. And people aren't like that. People want to work now. They want to do the work. Let's roll up our sleeves and get it done. Further, they want to do it in groups. They want to collaborate. They want to hear what other people think. What do you think? And so the idea is this 2-hour workshop is to say, we're going to build dissatisfaction and vision over the first hour, and then in the second hour, we're actually going to do the first steps. Don't wait for the work to be completed at a later time. So as we get into that, here's what happens. So I say we're going to do a Socratic workshop, a Socratic seminar, right? So the idea, so everyone gets excited, right? It's faculty facing, right? So you want to use kind of terminology that they would respond to. And in a Socratic seminar, we use the Socratic approach, the Socratic method. So these are actually the slides that I use to help them to understand the work that's going to be done. And the first thing I tell them is in all situations, you got to admit ignorance, which means if you don't know something, just say, I don't know, and then we can find out. But unless you're saying, I don't know, it creates real barriers to change and innovation and really doing the important work of interrogating these genealogies of how these problems get created. I've never met a man so ignorant that couldn't learn something from him, right? So that's good. Never rely on tradition, right? So in these curriculum maps, a lot of times people say, well, can't we just leave well enough alone? Why should we have to question everything? Well, it's not so much that we're questioning everything for its own sake. It's just that we don't want to rely on tradition. We want the current faculty to understand how the current program requirements actually lead to the outcomes that we want, which is successful graduates, right? And unless the current curriculum committees can understand and articulate why a program looks the way it does, that's a threat to institutional viability. So we don't rely on tradition. We continuously question. An unexamined life is not worth living. We formulate our own opinions. This is John Stuart Mill. If all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of a contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. And so the idea here is I tell them, if you believe something and you want to advocate for something, you really need to think about how you can have a strong voice and stick with your point, not to be argumentative, but to stick with your point and ask other people to defend their positions and to have a really collegial exchange. And then last, you want to test your opinions with or against others, right? I much prefer the sharp criticism of a single intelligent man to the thoughtless approval of the masses. And so the kind of this is like a 5-minute thing that I do to get them started. And I just say, look, before we get into this working session, I want you to know that this space is going to be productive when this space is very interrogative, or meaning when we actually are using the Socratic approach to do the hard work of questioning how things are in this analytics software. Now, I remind them also that there's a difference between disruption and weaponization. As we optimize the university, we don't want to weaponize these tools. The purpose of analytics isn't to be weapons. The purpose of analytics is to make the unseen seen, to make the unquestioned questionable, and to catalyze long overdue conversations. So it is, I have seen at times and in places people weaponizing this kind of data or information. Any information can be weaponized. And so I just remind them, be collegial as we go into this, right? And then be open to the possibilities. When things are going well, we advocate. We're not using analytics to drive change for change's sake. Innovation for its own sake is ridiculous. We're using analytics to scope opportunities, to identify actually opportunities when things are going well. So I remind them of this idea that just because sometimes some people use this software and find things that need to be updated or innovated, doesn't mean everyone is going to use the software and find things that need to be changed. One of the possibilities that faculty will find in using the software, curriculum committees will find in using the software, is that things are actually going well. And when things go well, we advocate. And we say, actually, we looked the horse in the mouth, and after looking in this software, this analytics software, we actually think that things are going well. But there's also an alternative, when things could be better. And when we do that, we don't blame, we just innovate. We just say, okay, well, let's make it better. So the first kind of opportunity, number one, that I take them through in the working session is pathway interrogation. So who created each course connection and why? In other words, who's the first person to have said, what year did it happen when these two courses were linked? Why did they link them? Does anyone know? We don't know. Okay, well, you probably should know. If you can't figure out who it was, you should at least figure out the why, right? Is every course connection necessary, right? So each one of these connections, just go through kind of one by one, and then all their alternative methods of program structure and management that might be advantageous. So I tell them this is going to be about 20 minutes. So they have 20 minutes to work in small groups to do this work and to get as far along as they can. And all the excitement, right, that fills the room because they have a chance to, and they all have their laptops and they're looking, and what do you think, and what do you know? And we give them, we have a repository at Utah State of all of our syllabi that have ever been uploaded into our LMS. And so a lot of times, so I give them that resource, it's a web link, and basically a lot of times they have to look up a syllabus. So the faculty will say, oh, well, I don't know what that class is. I don't even know who teaches it, what the syllabus is. So I can't even tell you why the connection, why it's a prereq. So we say, well, let's look up in the syllabus tracker, this repository, and pull up the syllabus, and maybe you can figure it out. Or maybe you need to have a conversation with the faculty that teach it. Opportunity two is an intentional syllabus synergy. Does the person teaching the prereqs for your course know why the connection exists? You may know, but do they know? And have you even interfaced with them, especially if they're in a different college or a different department? Have you gone over and visited and say, hey, you teach a class that's a prereq for my class. Did you know that? What do you teach? What are your outcomes? How does that lead to what I'm hoping my students come into my class prepared with? These conversations between faculty are some of the things that make the institution a fun place to work, right? You start to have collegial conversations, you start to get to know people, and you see people from a different college, you say, oh, I know you, we worked on that syllabus synergy together, you know? Does your syllabus communicate to students and other faculty the progression of the content from previous and later courses? In other words, are you helping the students understand how your course relates to what's come before? Are you helping students in your syllabus to understand how your course prepares them for future courses that may require your class? If you're not doing those things, it's a missed opportunity because a lot of times these prereq relationships are challenging for students to have to respond to, and having a little bit of reasoning in a syllabus as to why prereqs were what they were or why outcome courses are what they are goes a long way in helping students to understand that this isn't all arbitrary, it's actually very intentional. And then are you open to having these conversations collegially? Like I say, are you open to going across in a different building, different college and saying, hey, I wanted to talk to you, you know, and just build a relationship with you because we teach courses that are actually related. Your course leads right into mine and I wanted you to know that. I think most academics would be very responsive as long as you're not, and that's why I say collegially, as long as you're not sniping at people, as long as you're not accusing people or burdening people with extra work, but you're just being kind of collegial. Can we have a conversation? Then I think that's a good opportunity there. And so for that, I give them another 10, 15 minutes to start to think about how to do that work. What conversations do they want to have? Which faculty have they not met? Make a list of faculty you haven't met yet, who you'd like to meet for classes that are related to the core teaching that you're doing at the institution, and then go have those conversations, make a plan. And then opportunity 3 is benchmarking. So the software, every program that gets uploaded into this open source tool is then in a library for everyone to look at. So you can search by institution, you can search by program. So if I wanted to look at what Oregon is doing with their animal science programs, I could get in and look, and we can do this benchmarking, right? So because there's only a limited number of schools that are using it, even though it's open source and free, not everyone's jumped on the bandwagon, so to speak, then we have to kind of ask the faculty to go in and say, well, what comparisons are available? What other food science programs? What other animal science programs? What other music education programs do you see in here that you actually can start comparing? What do we know about the other schools with lower complexity scores? Are they higher rated schools? Are they higher rated programs? Are the graduates more successful? Can we model after their curriculum? If it's a higher rated program, if we look at Oregon and they have a better program than us, and their curriculum's less complex, maybe we need to follow after them. And what other universities can we invite to the party? So this is a really good opportunity also to say, maybe I know that at Princeton, they have a really good modern languages program. And so the Princeton curriculum isn't in this tool yet, right? But we could call them and say, hey, did you know about this curriculum complexity thing? Would you be interested in getting your curriculum in there so we could see your complexity and model after it? Because we know that your program is #1 in the nation, and you want to model after your modern languages, right? So we want to have similar complexity as you. These are conversations that obviously, this is why the agency is so important, because to do that work really takes a person saying, this is important to me. People call Princeton because they want to call Princeton, not because their provost told them you need to benchmark, right? People call and go to other colleges and interface with their faculty because they want to have a really productive conversation about how to help students be successful in the sequence of courses that they're required to take. When you're empowering people through change management to do that work, it means not mandating, but really looking for ways to persuade them that that work is desirable, that it can be done, and that there's good fruits for that labor. So this change management equation, all in all, is meant to design to help faculty to really have a complete experience of feeling a little bit of dissatisfaction about the complexity, having a vision for how things can improve, and then actually walking them through some of the first steps so they can get a taste of how easy the work is and how much dividends there are. So you can see that this agenda, right? So there's the facilitated discussion about prerequisites, that's the dissatisfaction. There's the introduction to the software, which provides vision. And there's the Socratic working session, which is the first steps. Now, the faculty kind of responded, and they just basically said, here's some things that they gave in the middle of the seminar. I didn't even know that some of these courses were related to the courses I teach. Like, they were shocked. They were like, my course, I didn't even realize it was a prereq for this other course. Why? I don't even understand, because I don't do anything that helps students get ready for that course, right? So these light bulb moments that are really valuable. There was one program that said, we see now that we're requiring students to take 2 statistics courses when we believe that 1 would be sufficient. When they looked at the complexity, there was this kind of like two course, they're not even sequenced courses, one's not a prereq of the other, but they were they felt like the program was bloated. And so they were like, we're gonna get rid of one of these requirements actually. And the academic advisor who put the curriculum into the map, uploaded it originally, they had wanted that. They kind of forecasted that the faculty would come to that conclusion. And this advisor had known this was a problem for years, and this software was an opportunity to catalyze that conversation. The last thing that I want to share is one of the faculty kind of raised their hand in the middle of the Socratic working session and just kind of said, look, this was fun. Like, I'm having a great time. And what other analytic strengths do you offer? And as a person whose job it is to socialize analytics and to make analytics actually help analytics to change practice, that was a really thrilling thing to have a faculty member say. But more importantly, the answer was, yeah, we do other trainings. Yeah, we have a lot of tools for you. And one that I want to kind of mention is that we do a training where we use analytics to optimize the syllabus, right? So just for your guys' information, as you view this webinar, we have an analytics system that just looks at correlations between course grades and graduation rates. And we use that one correlation to start a 2-hour conversation about making the syllabus a lot more empowering for students. And that's a very thrilling kind of empowering, what we would call autonomy-supportive kind of response, right? When a faculty member says, I'm enjoying using analytics to change and enhance the institution, what other things can I do to change and enhance? You have to have answers ready for them, but more importantly, we do, and this was the example I provided to them. I said, oh yeah, we do this other one, and you should sign up for it, and it's great. But the idea here is that analytics should be fun. As we look at that life cycle of sustainable analytics, on the second half there, it's labeled fulfillment of human needs. And that's no mistake. So many people look at analytics as kind of like a chore or as a new initiative or as this techie thing that we have to do because it's tech, it's innovation, it's the 21st century, it's 2019, we have to do it analytics. But my experience is that when you're deploying analytics effectively with an eye towards this kind of enhancing student well-being and also enhancing professional well-being, it fulfills their human needs. That faculty member who said, this was fun, what else do you have? You've whet my appetite for using analytics. What she was saying was, you fulfilled something that for me was something I didn't know I needed, but that once you've given it to me, I really want more. And I think that that's the kind of idea of when you're wanting to sustain analytics, you want to leave people wanting more. And you do that through the proper socialization and through the proper empowerment, which is so often left undone. A lot of times these tools get turned on, use gets mandated by an executive level administrator, but the proper socialization, the proper experiential learning, it doesn't take place. One thing that I'm constantly reminding people is that professionals are adults, and adults, we know how, there's the learning sciences all about adult learning. When you want a professional to do better in their job, you're talking about an adult learning sciences issue. And the learning sciences, which are about how to teach college students, are really relevant to how to teach professionals how to enhance their experiences as professionals. And we call that, the theory that I most likely to use and refer to as what's called an autonomy-supportive approach. But the life cycle of sustainable analytics is all about this empowerment and helping people to see that the use of analytics really is something that can be fun, that can help us to do better work and to actually get a better result for our students. Now I want to open it up to any questions that people have. While you're typing your questions into the chat box, I have a few more things to say. You can always reach out to me at mitchell.culver@usu.edu. We also have a website, ais.usu.edu/analytics. And there's lots of media resources on there. All the webinars that we do are on there. There's white papers. There's other kind of reports and documents that we've used in various places. And so those are all available and free. And we try to make these webinars free so that people can capture the spirit and catch the bug of helping analytics to be sustainable. So if you have any questions, type those in now, and we'll address them. If we hear no questions, then we can just wrap up. I should say, as you log into that software, there is some, at least initial instructions about how to create files that are ready for upload. If you have questions about how to use that software, you can reach out to New Mexico, you can reach out to us, but we're happy to field those questions. Braden Ross has a question. What is your go-to response to faculty who are concerned that using analytics like these will result in punitive action between faculty? So that's a really good question, and it's a really good concern to have on your radar. So what I would say is that we started with this at the provost level. So we got permission to do these trainings at the provost level. We got his word that these things wouldn't be used as weapons or as tools of mandated destruction, kind of thing. We also went through associate deans and department heads to make sure that they understood what we were doing, that they understood that this was not a weaponization or a performance-based appraisal kind of opportunity. It was an opportunity of kind of exploration. And so going into the faculty and doing the training and keeping it very autonomy supportive with the department head in the room was really designed around this idea of if change is going to happen, it's because faculty want it to happen. And I said that multiple times, in the training. If you're gonna be excellent, it's because you decide to be excellent. If you're gonna do excellent things with these tools, it's because you want to do excellent things with these tools. And I said, I come bearing greetings from the provost. There is no artificial mandate here. There is no fire. We have very clear guidelines that this is meant to be an autonomy-supportive experience, which means that people are engaging in the work because they see it's valuable. So that's kind of how I would answer that question. I don't, in terms of faculty being punitive to other faculty, I think that has to be addressed case by case. But if you're being autonomy-supportive, the hope is that faculty don't turn and weaponize. Mark Ward asked a question. Mark, actually, it's funny, I know Mark, he used to be a student of mine. Hi Mitchell, we're about to socialize the curriculum analytics tool to several departments on their campus. Mark's in Washington. We are also going to provide maps that have individual course completion rates and DFW rates. Do you see any issue with providing this additional information? No. In terms of creating that dissatisfaction, those maps and those course completion rates and DFW rates may actually enrich the conversation and help people to identify areas where there may be a problem with high, if a class has a high DFW rate and it's also in a long curriculum chain of one course leading to another, then that extra nuanced information is going to help the faculty to think through, well, maybe we need to clean this curriculum up a bit, because if students are failing that class all the time and it's an unnecessary or artificial prereq, then we're creating a problematic barrier. In terms of DFW rates, I would publish them not instructor by instructor, but or section by section. I would publish them course by course, just so that you're not isolating individuals, but you kind of have at least that group level. And then I would also say that information, I would read the department and talk to the department head. If the department has a history of being kind of argumentative, then maybe that information could be weaponized a little bit easier if the climate is right. So I think you got to play that by ear, but I don't think that there's inherent harm in providing those data, but you should be mindful that it's a good opportunity to have a nuanced conversation if the faculty are ready for that conversation. So we're right here at the end of the hour. That's the last question that's been typed in. I hope that was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you at next month's webinar. Thanks so much.